following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio, streaming, and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Liana Kersner, and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for navigating the madness of mental health using my top 10 sayings for going good crazy. This episode, we're talking about dealing with prejudice. Last week, I deliberately left that out of the discussion about talking to your friends about politics, so we're going to deal with it this week. We also have a sponsor back this week. It's Not Therapy is proud to be supported by Phases Executive Fitness Studio. Phases is more than just personal training, physiotherapy, chiropractic, osteopathy, massage therapy, Pilates, and yoga. For over 25 years, directors Kathy Nielsen and Garrick Nelson and their team have taken functional rehabilitation to another level, incorporating wellness to empower their clients to take control of their own health. Personalized exercise plans, leading-edge nutrition, physical therapy, and personal wellness services that benefit your physical and mental health. It's all here for you at Phases Executive Fitness Center. You can find them in North York by visiting phasesexecfit.com. That's phases, like phases of the moon, execfit.com. Okay, let's dig into prejudice. Now, right off the top, having a few prejudices doesn't overall make you a bad person. It's much better to recognize those biases than to try to ignore them and act poorly. We all generalize and rely on stereotypes sometimes, and the fact that being on the receiving end of bigotry is extremely painful doesn't mean that you meant to hurt anyone. The best way to show you meant no harm is to slow down, identify the problem, and correct your understanding. More importantly, we all deserve to heal our own pain that's a result of representatives of a given group being cruel to us. Prejudice goes in cycles. We get hurt so badly that we develop a grudge against an entire group of people. So we cause pain for members of that group who develop their own grudges, and the cycle continues. Only by breaking that cycle in ourselves can we truly say we're helping to make things better. The challenge with prejudice is that it exists on a spectrum of useful human behavior. What? No, really. We all use heuristics, mental shortcuts that sacrifice optimal accuracy for speed and simplicity. That's called heuristics. Those heuristics become stereotypes. Those stereotypes feed prejudice. Stereotypes are tricky because some of them seem positive, like the stereotype that South Asians are polite and Asians are good at math. Again, I said these were stereotypes, not realities. I know. Stereotypes have profoundly impacted politics, notably the U.S. election. The Republicans were caught flat-footed by Joe Biden dropping out of the race last week. They apparently thought his Irish pride would prevent him from doing that. And because the immediate reaction of many of these caught flat-footed Republicans was to descend into racist and sexist attacks against Kamala Harris. I mean, they were the worst of gutter politics. More on that later. It was ugly, but it was also stupid. It ironically played into every stereotype about Republicans being racist, sexist bigots who want women back in the kitchen. And that's the problem with stereotypes. You spend your entire life either playing into the ones that apply to you or actively opposing them, and you suffer consequences either way. Everyone deals with this. I don't care who you are, and we can all agree that it's exhausting. And yet, we all indulge in stereotypes. And yet many of us are absolutely merciless when someone else indulges in stereotypes. It's hypocrisy all the way down, and things aren't improving. In fact, you could almost say it's making things worse for everybody because it's creating incentives for certain people to give into the prejudice instead of trying to be better. This whole weird dynamic that's developed that people confuse positive stereotyping for equality and then develop this artificial chip on their shoulder about white, straight, cisgender men being the true disenfranchised group. Here's the thing. If you know someone like that, if you are someone like that, no amount of facts or logic is going to change anyone's mind. It's an emotional response, both for and against. What the people who are saying white, straight, cisgender men are the truly disenfranchised group are saying is, I don't feel cared about, or I feel tossed aside. And yelling at them will just convince them that they're right, even though a lot of them completely deserve to get yelled at. You may notice that grown adults who make these statements suddenly seem unpleasantly childlike, because it's very possible they're regressing to an age where they felt remotely safe and protected. So you're probably dealing with an emotional 8 to 12-year-old when someone's in that state. That's essentially what prejudice boils down to. An emotional response that makes someone feel temporarily safe. And do you reward bad behavior in a literal or figurative 8 to 12-year-old? Well, no. Do you teach them that their feelings matter? Yes. So something like, okay, whatever the statistics say, you feel like you don't matter to the people around you. What can we do about that? That's a starting point. Now, that can also get you a face full of nothing. There's nothing I can do. The world hates men. I picked that one because I personally hear that one a lot. It's pretty common in male children of women who used positive stereotypes of women being inherently angelic and incapable of cruelty to abuse their sons, especially sons that didn't conform to their mother's rigid expectations of men. And when every female role model a man had leveraged positive stereotypes about women and negative stereotypes about men, you can see why guys would grow up to believe the world hates men. And we can talk about that if we get the conversation into a personal footing instead of a conversation about entire groups of people, privilege, and microaggressions. Oh, I said the word. Yes, we're going to get into privilege and then microaggressions in this show. We're going to go there starting after the break. Questions, comments, concerns. I really like feedback. I like having conversations. Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is a website. Join our mailing list while you're there. At Not Therapy Show on social media. Dealing with prejudice. Privilege. Let's talk about privilege. Let's talk about why people don't like privilege after the break on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist, and we're still talking about dealing with prejudice. This episode of It's Not Therapy is sponsored by Phases Executive Fitness Studio, your one-stop shop for fitness and personal wellness services. You can find them in North York by visiting phasesexecfit.com. Phases, that's phases like that thing your teenager's going through, execfit.com. Okay, I promised before the break to talk about privilege and microaggressions, and it's likely that when I said that, half of you pricked your ears up and half of you rolled your eyes. Some of you did both. These are terms that, to use internet parlance, broke containment from academia. Privilege and microaggression are terms that were skibbity before Generation Alpha came up with the term skibbity. I see you, alphas. I feel you, alphas. You make sense. Skibbity is a genius term because it's nonsense slang that gently mocks the overuse of slang terms. Academics would do well to realize that a large portion of their profession is skibbity. And that's the problem with terms like privilege and microaggression. They don't mean the same thing to academics as they do to regular people. So using privilege and microaggressions outside of academia or private HR conversations, like among HR professionals, yeah, it causes more problems than it solves. every time I even dare to mention the word privilege in not a safe space, someone interrupts me to tell me why they don't like the term privilege. There is absolutely no ability for me to complete my thought about the term privilege because the minute I bring it up, someone determines it's their turn to talk, and they're gonna tell me why they don't like the term privilege before I am allowed to proceed. Which is essentially showing that they have more privilege to talk than I do in the given conversation, and that's why it makes them look foolish to anybody watching, but this reaction is rooted in an emotional response and an identity threat. So rationality, a sense of cause and effect, it leaves the building. And that's okay. That's human. Now, I'm going to tell you why I find the term privilege personally useful, just to me, since no one is here to interrupt me right now, because it's my show. And because it's my show, I have the privilege of talking to all you lovely people with no interruptions from anyone but the sponsors. Yeah. Privilege is defined as a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. Again, privilege, a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. Privilege is not the same as a right or an advantage. A privilege is something a social structure permits you to do that it doesn't permit others to do. A privilege applies only to some people some of the time, as opposed to rights, which apply to everyone all of the time. Similarly, advantages are permanent. Advantages can't be taken away by social structure. A very smart or athletic person is going to have advantages that only go away when they suddenly become not smart or gradually not athletic. So, for instance, being very intelligent or well-educated is an advantage that can never be removed, whereas a privilege associated with being white or male or even sometimes female can be stripped of you by the situation or the group you're in due to various social rules being rewritten. It's very important to be aware of the privileges we have so we don't lean on them too hard, precisely because privileges can be taken away from us. An inability to tell the difference between a right, an advantage, and a privilege makes you very likely to miscalculate and end up on the wrong end of social or business situations. For instance, here's an example. Anyone who talks about gender-based rights is telling you something that isn't true. It doesn't matter if it's men's rights or what has become women's gender-based rights or sex-based rights. There's no such thing as a gender-based right because rights apply to everyone. Women's rights is a shorthand for the idea of equal rights for women. There is no right to, say, a woman's only toilet any more than there is a right to a whites only toilet. Women's only spaces, as well as men's only spaces, are privileges granted by various groups to create a greater feeling of comfort. There is no right at stake there. The underlying right is the right to access public washrooms with a sense of dignity and safety, and everyone has that right. Not just women. Trans women have that right. Cisgender men have that right. Transgender men have that right, and I don't care right now if you like the term cisgender. More on that in a bit. Privileges can lead to advantages. For instance, the children of graduates from Ivy League schools have a better chance of having the privilege of attending those Ivy League schools, right? Your parents went, you're more likely to go. Look at the statistics. But if those children of graduates from Ivy League schools also graduate, that Ivy League degree is a permanent advantage in employment opportunities. Not a guarantee, but it certainly helps, right? Now, that doesn't mean that the child of the alumnus didn't work hard to earn that degree. They probably worked very hard. It just means that according to our current rules of society, they started off further ahead. So they had it a bit easier. That doesn't mean they had it easy. It's important to recognize that. If you don't, your decisions will be based on inaccurate data, and you'll end up like Elon Musk, an undeniably intelligent man who recently claimed his 16-year-old kid tricked him into approving gender-affirming care because of the woke mind virus. Let's break that down, okay? Either Elon Musk is right, and he was stupid enough to get fooled by a 16-year-old with profound mental illness, or Elon Musk is wrong, and he just sounds like an idiot saying woke mind virus. This is how being unaware of your privileges leads you to looking like a fool. Unawareness of your own privileges is essential to successfully navigating social and intellectual situations with different kinds of people, especially when it comes to giving other people a chance to talk. Think about it, if you're not grasping this whole privilege thing, in a metaphor about workplaces. What kind of boss would you rather work for? A boss that recognizes that they are, in fact, the boss and uses that fact in an organized, judicious, benevolent way, or one of those bosses who pretends to be just one of the guys, and so they don't wield power responsibly, and they insist everyone else is just misunderstanding them when they act like a bully, right? Those sorts of bosses, the ones, oh no, I'm just one of the guys, I'm not the boss, right? They tend to cultivate workplaces that are full of chaos, backstabbing, and mistrust because no one is in charge. This isn't the same as a manager with a consensus building style. This is a manager who won't manage. And I can hear what you're saying, but I'm not the boss, it's different. That's the protest, right? I hear it all the time. And this is where my top 10 phrase, be the hero of your own story and not anyone else's, comes in. You are the boss of your own behavior. And if you're in your own personal, but I'm the real victim pity party, you're not being the hero of your own story. You're not owning the power and control that you do have. When someone is trying to talk to you about the structural realities of society, they're not saying you're evil for, say, being white. Or, you know what? I'll give it to you. Maybe they are. But even if they are, they're saying you're evil for being white. You're not required to believe them. Be the hero of your own story. You don't become the villain of the story just because someone else says you should. And this is where the don't be the hero of anyone else's story comes in. If someone is trying to talk to you about something important to them, interrupting them to tell them you don't like a word and shifting the conversation to why you don't like the word is putting yourself in the role of protagonist of the conversation. You interrupted something that was important to the other person because what was important to you was more important, right? That's what we call main character syndrome. This is a point to be really honest about yourself, about why you interrupted. Is the whole concept of privilege a pain point? And you're asking the person to be cautious with that because, okay, you can't listen well, you can't be totally rational here, it's been weaponized against you. If that's true, just say that. It's way better. It's more explicit. If that's really why you've stopped the conversation. It's important to consider and really consider whether you're putting your comfort over another person's interest in being heard. And if you are, top 10 phrase, don't let problems that aren't your fault lead to mistakes that are. You've got real and valid reasons to not like people reducing you to white, straight, and cisgender, assuming the last two, of course. Straight and cisgender are not immediately apparent. You can't look at someone and go, oh, they're totally cisgender, or they're totally straight, right? You don't have to be a jerk about not liking people reducing you to white, straight, and cisgender, right? I guarantee you every woman named Karen doesn't like what her name has come to be associated with. I don't like what the name Karen has come to be associated with. I know some absolutely lovely Karens who've changed their name to K because they're stuck with it. Even thinking you have the right to say you don't like certain words puts you in a very rarefied category. Because there are plenty of words I don't like being called, but I'm stuck being called them. So ask yourself, what words are you willing to give up because you don't like the term privilege? Because if you're allowed to stop a conversation dead because you don't like a word, so is everyone else. Every term that's been co-opted as a dog whistle is now off the table if you think you can stop a conversation because of the word privilege. Annoying, articulate, team player, likable, unhinged, inappropriate. The list of words that are now verboten is completely unending under those rules of, I don't like that word, and that's enough to stop things dead. Okay, if you're prepared to let anybody, anywhere, strike words they don't like, right? Go ahead and strike privileged from whitelisted phrases. But if you don't like the idea that people can just shut down words that do have their place because of an unpleasant personal association, well, then you have to show the ability to handle words you don't like if you expect anybody else to also do the same thing. In ideal circumstances, among friends, everybody ideally has the ability to say, please use another word, that word hurts me. That's what friends should do for friends and family should do for family, but that's not reality for most people. In the circumstances most people face, some people have the privilege of setting that boundary. I don't like that word, don't use it. And others don't. Don't let a lack of understanding of that concept, the idea that being able to say, I don't like that word, is a privilege. It is, you're assuming the other person cares and will do anything about it, right? Don't let that prejudice your thinking and cause you to come across in ways you don't intend. Questions, comments, concerns, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website. Join our mailing list while you're there. Fill out the contact form at Not Therapy Show on socials. When we come back, I promised, I did privilege, I'm going to look at the term microaggressions. Why I don't like it, but I understand why people use it. I'm checking my privilege when I come back on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist, and this episode is still sponsored by Phases Executive Fitness Studio, phasesexecfit.com. for all your fitness and personal wellness needs. Again, that's Phases Executive Fitness Studio. Phases like the moon, phasesexecfit.com. PH, phasesexecfit.com. Now, as promised before the break, in this discussion of how to navigate prejudice, I'm going to dig into microaggressions, a term that I understand describes an important phenomenon. But thanks, I kind of hate it because there's nothing micro about the impact these behaviors have. A microaggression is defined as a statement, action, or incident regarded as an instance of indirect subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group, such as a racial or ethnic minority. That's a mouthful. I'll shorten it. A microaggression is a statement, action, or incident regarded as discriminatory against members of a marginalized group. Okay. Indirect, subtle, or unintentional. Those are the criteria. Here's my issue with that. If a comment is unintentional, right? If nobody meant harm, then a simple explanation of why it's bothersome is enough for someone to stop, provided they don't get defensive. If they meant nothing by it, you explain how it comes across, trust me, they'll stop. They don't want to come across that way. But if the instance of indirect or subtle discrimination is deliberate, then whatever social structure is at play has given that person doing the discriminating the impression that they have the absolute right to be bigoted jerk faces. And that is never a small problem. There's nothing micro about it. When we lump unintentional mistakes in with deliberate passive aggression, we tend to accidentally create more of the behavior we don't want. See again, the woke mind virus nonsense. That crud only works on people who have had bad past experiences with being crucified for an accidental mistake. If it happens often enough, a person gets fed up with being picked apart, regresses into that childlike emotional state I mentioned in the first segment, and starts saying stuff that they know is prejudice because they don't think any effort they put in will ever be enough. I work with some people who have that reaction just by seeing enough of the people they know go through that. It doesn't even have to happen to them. It's not logical. But it is very, very human. There are certain emotional instincts that happen faster than thought that we can't do anything about here at play. But, huge but, for the person on the receiving end of the microaggressions, sometimes it's absolutely impossible to know whether the comments are intentional or not. Too many bullies say they were just kidding. If they really were just kidding, then they'll stop when you don't find it funny. Otherwise, it's just normalized abuse. Unfortunately, abuse is normalized in many social and professional settings, and a system based on banning words is easy for true abusers to manipulate. So, follow my own advice. The term microaggressions does make sense in the context of someone explaining how the little tiny put-downs they experience so frequently pile up into really impacting their self-esteem and productivity. See, that is how you understand and validate a word you don't personally like. And that is what a lot of cookie-cutter DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion policy gets wrong. Most people don't want someone to just shut up, right? It's better than nothing. But most people, at least conscientious people, don't want to wantonly silence colleagues. They want the opposite of that. They want the colleague to understand the problem so that colleague can make corrections from an informed place. They don't want anybody to feel bad. They just don't want to feel bad, right? And these conversations can be extremely difficult, frustrating, and painful for everyone involved. But they're worthwhile. It's the only way we get true inclusion for everyone. Because they actually do allow everyone involved to feel heard and included. But most organizations don't want to take the time, nor do they have facilitators for these conversations. Many HR departments exist primarily to protect the company's proverbial backside, not really help employees. So instead, we have a bunch of well-meaning people following policies that don't work, and the very concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion is getting treated like a bad thing. instead of focusing on the legitimately poor implementation in a lot of places. Worse, every person who isn't white, straight, and cisgender is getting treated like a diversity hire. And I'm leaving out white women because I know from experience that the powers that be just assume we slept with someone to get the job, so it's not quite the same thing. It's important to keep in mind that the people who think these things, these, woke mind virus, DEI hire, those people are more wounded people than bad people in most circumstances, in my experience. A lot of caveats, but hear me out. These people love their family deeply, care about their community, treat their friends decently, even the friends who aren't like those other ones of their kind. And these otherwise good people harbor legitimate bigotry. It's important for those of us who want to be part of the solution to prejudice to be very aware of our own prejudices that could possibly inflame and make us less effective. Meaning, no generalized, I hate men statements, unless you're willing to admit that it was true in that moment and own, your own, yeah, I slipped up there. No kill white people or Hamas is coming, then claiming that's anti-racist and anti-colonial. It's not. It's racist. It's cheering on colonizing by violence. Before we can do anything about prejudice in other people, we absolutely need to face it in ourselves. And it is hard. We all have those weak moments. We all take cheap shots sometimes. But accepting ourselves means accepting even the not great parts. It's the only way we can really begin work on them. This is an essential step to being centered when other people take shots at pieces of our identities. And if you do this kind of work, they will. Certain things will get under our skin. And that's not a failing. Certain things are designed to get under our skin, and people do them because they work. It's not fair to put the responsibility for shouldering the burden of bigotry on the people who are subjected to it. But despite that, sometimes we have to get our way through it anyway. And knowing who we are and liking that person and being compassionate with ourselves about the parts of us we don't like, all of that is essential to navigating this very difficult part of being a human being. Again, we have to know who we are. We have to overall like who we are. And we have to be compassionate with ourselves about the parts we don't like. Sometimes it helps to not worry about liking a part of ourselves per se. That part just is, right? Certain people complain about there being no straight Pride Month when there's an LGBTQ Pride Month, missing the fact that there was never any mass socially enforced shame placed on being straight. To put it another way, no one was ever told they were going to hell for being heterosexual. That does not mean people haven't been shamed by their immediate peer groups. You don't have to be proud of being straight or not straight. If you are, great. Just make sure that people who are different from you, you don't see them as less, right? But being straight, being LGBTQ+, it just is, right? You're not required to be proud of it. Black girls aren't required to do magic. Black boys need to be allowed to slip up every so often. Perfect is a lie. Stop trying to be perfect. Top 10 phrase. But if you survived an onslaught of prejudice, racism, homophobia, anything, even if you didn't behave perfectly in response, you're allowed to be proud of the fact that you survived it, because that is an achievement. Remember that people who hate tend to be reacting to the hurt from the hate that they experienced. So if you get through someone treating you as less, treating you like you're worthless because you're different without becoming bitter, okay, you're allowed to be a little bitter as long as it's temporary. If you get through it, even if some stuff broke along the way, You're allowed to be proud that you got through it. Questions, comments, any feedback. I like feedback. Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Liana, nottherapyshow.com is the website. Join the mailing list while you're on the website. Fill out the contact form. Or at Not Therapy Show on socials. When we come back, I'll give you some tips to get through facing prejudice. Learn from years of me doing it absolutely wrong. Yes, spilling the tea when we come back on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back and It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kurzner. I'm still not a therapist. Why do we say we? It's just me. Me and the friends in my head. Good, crazy. We are still talking about dealing with prejudice. This episode of It's Not Therapy is brought to you by Phases Executive Fitness Studio. Phases, like phases of the moon. execfit.com. All right. How to deal with prejudice. Don't you love shows that spend most of the show defining the problem only to give you a few platitudes of how to deal with it in the last segment? Fortunately, this isn't that kind of show. I've been giving you the basic technique the whole time, but I'll summarize here if you ever want to come back and just listen to this last part. The gist of it all, I said gist, is summarized by some top 10 phrases. Top 10 phrase, don't let problems that aren't your fault lead to mistakes that are. Top 10 phrase, healthy goals are based on things you can control. Top 10 phrase, be the hero of your own story and not anyone else's. I brought those all up in the program. You see, I wasn't holding out on you. Now, how do we do that? Top 10 phrase, perfect is a lie. Stop trying to be perfect. I already mentioned that one. Top 10 phrase, self-esteem cannot exist without self-compassion. Remember when I talked about liking yourself and being compassionate with the parts of yourself you don't like? Yeah. Top 10 phrase, ignoring negatives isn't being positive. And top 10 phrase, listen twice before you talk once. Oh, yeah. 6 of the top 10 in one show. Yeah. The reason microaggressions pile up to make you feel like garbage is because they're a bunch of tiny little reminders that some cruel people have power over you and you lack the ability to control your circumstances. And that's a problem that you can do nothing about. But you can avoid the mistakes I made that led to. Oh my God. I was taught to do it all wrong. Like hilariously wrong. Like I took women's studies in university wrong. Fortunately, I was on scholarship, so I didn't really pay. Well, I paid for books to learn how to completely screw it up. Those books were expensive. They taught me that when I saw sexism, I should call it out. And I did. And that was a mistake. If someone is allowed to discriminate on the basis of sex and get away with it, the big problem isn't the individual. It's the fact that the system surrounding them allows and defends sexism. A much better lesson that I got totally free. Okay, I was traveling, but okay. This lesson was taught to me by a Creole tarot card reader in an all-night diner in the French Quarter of New Orleans pre-Katrina, okay? She dropped a card and it fell on the floor next to me. And she insisted on reading my cards. And I only vaguely remember the details of the reading. What I remember starkly is she kept saying, the voodoo queen doesn't tell you she's a voodoo queen. With, an implied knowing wink, right? People with PhDs steered me totally wrong, but a voodoo lady gave me the good stuff. Here's the meaning there, okay? The voodoo queen doesn't tell you she's a voodoo queen because do you know what they did to voodoo queens? You never give them the tools to destroy you. So if someone is being sexist or racist or homophobic or transphobic or any other kind of bigotry, don't say they are being sexist or racist or homophobic or transphobic or any other kind of bigotry. Tell them the specifics of why it's a problem without using the isms, okay? This requires a huge amount of self-awareness, a huge amount of control and a huge amount of practice, and you'll get it wrong so many times before you get it right, but I swear it works. Let me give you an example based on a recent news story. GOP VP, that was it, VIP. I don't think JD Vance is, well, he's an important person, but, oh boy, Republican, right? Donald Trump's vice presidential nominee pick. Yeah, okay. Comments from 2021, so not that long ago, that he said recently resurfaced, and they are. We are effectively running this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. And yeah, this comment is clearly grounded in the idea that women can't be fulfilled unless they have children. Childless cat lady. Which is not only sexist and not only discriminatory against cat men, but it's not true. Vance responded this week trying to, blunt the criticism. And here's what he said. The simple point I made that is having children, becoming a father, becoming a mother, I really do think it changes your perspective in a pretty profound way. I explicitly said in my remarks, despite the fact the media has lied about this is not about criticizing people who, for various reasons, didn't have kids. This is about criticizing the Democratic Party for becoming anti-family and anti-child. I'm proud to stand up for parents, and I hope the parents out there recognize that I'm a guy who wants to fight for you. I want to fight for your interests. I want to fight for your stake in the country, and that is what is fundamentally about. Okay. Vance's defense of his original comments is worse than the Maple Leafs defensive line. Oh, I went there. Yeah, sorry, Leafs fans. But, okay, they're not that bad, right? The Leafs, being a Leafs fan is just being a heartbreak fan, right? JD Vance is relying on a system that will pick up and run with echoes of his comments. Yeah, he was just saying the Democrats are anti-family and anti-child, right? And this is a big cartoonish example of what happens with more nuance every day. It's what it's like to try to function in a prejudice system. It isn't about who's right. It's about who can get away with what and have the system back them. Now, to be clear, I don't think it's going to work in this case. The only way his comments could have played worse with swing voters and even a lot of Republican women is if he'd literally told interviewer Megyn Kelly to get back in the kitchen and make him a sandwich. But there was a lot of clapback. Kamala Harris's own family showed one way to do it right. They focused on why his statement was not only mean and overly generalized, it was wrong. I mean, when girl's husband's ex defends her. Wow. Yeah. Kirsten Emhoff, Doug Emhoff's ex-wife, biological mother of his children, said for over 10 years since Cole and Ella were teenagers, Kamala has been a co-parent with Doug and I. She is loving, nurturing, fiercely protective, and always present. I love our blended family, and I'm grateful to have her in it. And then one of the kids stepped up, too. Ella said, I love my 3 parents. How can you be childless when you have cutie pie kids like Cole and I? But it was Pete, I eat Republicans for breakfast and spit them out for lunch, Buttigieg. Pete Buttigieg, Mayor Pete. He's a transport secretary, but he'll always be Mayor Pete. He landed an utterly decimating response to this resurfaced clip. And he said, the really sad thing is that he, meaning Vance, said that after Chasten, that's Pete Buttigieg's husband, and I had been through a fairly heartbreaking setback in our adoption journey. He couldn't have known that, but maybe that's why you shouldn't be talking about other people's children. Boom! Connect emotionally, because bigotry comes from an emotional place. Show them where they're wrong when you can. Most importantly, make it clear that it's not okay to do to anyone. That's why Buttigieg's clapback was so brilliant. He appealed on the level Vance was trying to get to, caring about families. Top 10 phrase, core values are more important to relationships than common interests. Instead of debating the value of families, Buttigieg surgically got to the core of the problem with Vance's logic. You don't know what someone else has been through, whether not having kids was a choice or not. And cats are great, so shut your mouth. He never said Vance was a bigot or that he hated anything. He went after what was wrong with his behavior, not his intents. So it didn't get into a slugfest about who hated people who have families more, right? It was just not okay, bro. Not okay for anybody. And that's how you do it. Keep it simple, keep it universal, keep it emotionally connected, and make it something everyone can understand without a particular college degree. And most importantly, don't say anything you can't prove, which means don't assume motivations. Like I said, you will screw this up numerous times before you find the permutation of this that works for you. I did. And that's why mentorship is so valuable. But mentorship's not available to everyone. And any mentor, isn't an absolute perfect Venn diagram fit. Kamala loves the Venn diagrams, and I do too. But, you'll muddle through. You'll find people like that lady in New Orleans, who told me the voodoo queen doesn't tell you she's a voodoo queen, right? You'll figure it out. No matter what, just surviving the prejudice to live another day, that is within your control, no matter how many setbacks you have, no matter how many rough days you have. Just get through it. That's within your control. They can fire you, they can cancel you, but you're in control of the narrative you set. Be the hero of your own story and not anyone else's. Celebrate your survival anyway, in any way, at any time you can. Questions, comments, concerns, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Not Therapy Show is our website. Fill out the contact form. Join our mailing list while you're there at Not Therapy Show on socials. And thank you to Phases Executive Fitness Center, Phases Like the Moon, phasesexecfit.com for supporting this podcast. I am out of time. Remember, your crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you.